June 22, 1941, 3:15, German-Soviet border near Brest-Litovsk. Major Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, chief inspector of the German Panthers, watches through his Zeiss binoculars as the largest invasion force in human history prepares to attack. 3,800 men, 3,500 tanks, 27,000 artillery pieces. The early morning mist hangs over the wheat fields. The smell of diesel fuel and gun grease fills the chilly air. Von Thoma slowly rotates the turret of his Panzer, the pride of the Wehrmacht, admiring the Germanic precision of every weld, every rivet. Your radio operator hands you a captured intelligence report. Herr Major, our spies confirm. The Soviets have a new tank. They call it the T-34. Von Thoma lets out a dry laugh that echoes inside the steel tower. T-34. More communist trash welded by drunken peasants? He passes the report to his gunner without even reading it. Our Panzer IIIs can penetrate 50 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. There is no Soviet tank that can withstand the German technical superiority. Gunner Feldwebel Klaus Möller forces a nervous smile as he examines a grainy photo attached to the report. The tank in the image looks strange, almost alien, with its armor plates tilted at bizarre angles. It looks like a drunken blacksmith tried to make a pyramid out of sheet metal, Möller comments. Von Thoma takes the photo, studying it briefly. Look at these ridiculous angles. The Russians don't even understand that armor should be vertical for maximum thickness. This design wastes material, complicates production, and reduces interior space. It's third-rate engineering. He tosses the photo aside and raises his arm. At precisely 3:15, he lowers it. Operation Barbarossa begins. 3,000 German tanks cross the border, their Maybach engines roaring in unison, their tracks crushing Soviet soil with the confidence of predestined conquerors. What they didn't know was that, at that very moment, 500 T-34s were waiting silently in the forests and hills, their front plates tilted at precisely 60 degrees. Major von Thoma was about to discover that geometry, not steel, would be his undoing. Kharkov, Soviet Ukraine, Locomotive Factory No. 183, January 1937. The air inside the design warehouse is thick with cheap cigarette smoke and the acrid smell of machined metal. Mikhail Koshkin, a 40-year-old engineer with early-stage tuberculosis, traces lines on a drawing board that would change the course of World War II. Comrade Koshkin, his assistant, Alexander Morozov, points to the drawings. That's impossible. You're proposing to tilt the entire frontal armor 60 degrees from the vertical. Do you know how much that will complicate production? Koshkin coughs, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth with an already stained handkerchief. Alexander, answer me. What happens when a projectile hits an inclined surface? It bounces off or needs to penetrate through more material due to the angle. Exactly. Koshkin picks up a ruler and demonstrates. A 45 millimeter plate inclined at 60 degrees offers the equivalent of 90 millimeters of vertical armor. We double the protection without doubling the weight. But the internal space, it will be tight. The crew will suffer, but they will be alive to suffer. The T-34 project was born not of abundance, but of calculated desperation. The Soviet Union lacked the high-quality steel of the Germans. It lacked the industrial precision of the British. It lacked the infinite resources of the Americans. What he had was mathematics, and Mikhail Koshkin was a master of the geometry of survival. The first prototypes, designated A-20 and A-32, were walking disasters. The A-20's transmission broke during the first test. The A-32 caught fire when its engine overheated. Critics in the Defense Commissariat were merciless. Comrade Koshkin proposes a tank that our own crews cannot operate, thundered Marshal Kulik during a meeting in Moscow. The driver's compartment is so cramped that only men under 5 feet 7 inches can drive it. The turret barely accommodates 2 men. It's a metal tomb, not a tank. Stalin, sitting at the end of the table, smoking his signature pipe, remained silent for long minutes. Then he spoke. Show me the numbers. Koshkin, shaking with fever and fear, presented the calculations. Weight, 26 tons. Speed, 55 kilometers per hour. Effective frontal armor, 90 millimeters due to the angle. Cost, half that of a KV-1 heavy tank. What about mass production? Stalin asked. We can produce 3 T-34s for every KV-1. The sloped plates are more difficult to weld, yes, but we use less total steel. Any tractor factory can be converted. Stalin nodded slowly. Build 2 final prototypes. If they fail, you know the consequences. Koshkin knew. The Gulag or a bullet in the back of the head, possibly both. March 1940. The 2 T-34 prototypes needed to travel from Kharkov to Moscow for demonstration purposes, a distance of 750 kilometers. The commissariat ordered them to be transported by rail. Koshkin made a decision that would seal his fate and that of the war. "Let's drive," he announced to his astonished crew. "Mikhail Ilyich, are you crazy? It's winter. The roads are covered in snow." "Exactly. If the T-34 can't cross Russia in winter, what good is it against the Germans?" The journey was hell. Temperatures were minus 30 degrees. Koshkin, already ill, drove one of the tanks himself, refusing to rest. When the track broke, he went out into the snow to repair it with his own hands. When the engine froze, he warmed it with his own body heat. After 2,800 kilometers of brutal testing, back and forth, through storms and frozen swamps, the T-34s reached Moscow. Stalin personally watched as the tanks, covered in mud and ice, demonstrated their capabilities at the Kubinka proving ground. The T-34 climbed 40-degree slopes. It crossed 3-meter trenches. Its 76.2mm gun destroyed targets at 1,500 meters. "Approved for immediate production," Stalin declared. "I want 1,000 by the end of the year." Koshkin fainted on the spot. Pneumonia contracted during the trip would kill him 2 weeks later on September 26, 1940. He would never see his tank in combat. No one imagined that this brutal test in the Russian winter carried the seeds of Soviet victory. The man who died to prove his design had created not just a tank, but a philosophy of war, calculated sacrifice, geometry over brute force, quantity over sufficient quality. June 23, 1941, near Grodno, Belarus, Unteroffizier Hans Kramer carefully aligns the sights of his 50mm K-38 L-42 cannon. Through the Zeiss optics, he sees his target clearly. A strange Soviet tank with angular lines he's never seen before, advancing through a field of rye at a distance of 400 meters. "Target identified," Kramer reports calmly. "Unknown Soviet tank, range 400 meters. "Fire!" orders the commander. The Panzer III shudders with recoil. The 50mm armor-piercing round travels at 835 meters per second, a death sentence of tungsten and steel. Clang! The metallic clang echoes across the battlefield. Kramer watches in disbelief as the shell ricochets off the T-34's sloped armor, spinning helplessly in the air before burying itself in the ground. "Direct hit! No penetration!" Kramer yells, his voice breaking. "Impossible! Reload! Fire again!" Second shot, same result. The projectile simply skids down the sloped surface like a stone skipping across water. Now the T-34 rotates its turret. The 76.2mm gun points directly at them. Scheiße! Reverse! Reverse! The world explodes. The Soviet shell pierces the Panzer III's 30mm frontal armor like paper. Hans Kramer and his crew die instantly. All along the front, the same scene repeats itself. German reports from that day are documents of growing panic. 10th Panzer Division reports, "We have engaged an unknown Soviet tank formation. Our 50mm shells are ineffective beyond 100 meters. We have lost 12 Panzer IIIs in 30 minutes. 4th Panzer Division. New Soviet tank withstood 23 direct hits before being immobilized by track damage. Urgent request for 88mm guns." General Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, writes in his diary that night, "We have encountered a completely new Soviet tank. Our intelligence has failed catastrophically. The T-34 is superior to anything we possess. Its sloped armor renders our standard guns useless. This is a crisis." But the Soviet crisis was even greater. Of the 1,200 T-34s available in June 1941, 800 were lost in the first 6 weeks, not in combat, but to ammunition shortage. Many T-34s were abandoned after firing their 46 rounds inexperienced crews. Only 1 in 10 captains knew how to operate the radio-mechanical breakdowns. Transmissions failed after 100 kilometers, suicide tactics, orders to attack without infantry support. The Defense Commissioner's report of July 1941 was brutal. The T-34 is technically superior but tactically wasteful. Our crews don't know how to exploit its advantages. Many commanders don't even know about the angle of the armor and position the tank perpendicular to the enemy, denying its main protection. The T-34 had proven it could withstand German guns, but resistance wasn't enough. Perfect geometry was useless without the doctrine to exploit it. October 1941, Mtsensk, south of Moscow. Colonel Mikhail Koshkin, commander of the 4th Tank Brigade, watches through his binoculars as the German 2nd Panzer Division confidently advances along the Ural Road. He has only 50 operational T-34s against 200 German tanks. But Koshkin is different. An engineer by training, he spent weeks studying every detail of the T-34, every angle, every advantage and disadvantage. "Attention all commanders," he radios. "Remember, your tanks are strongest when the enemy is directly in front. The 60-degree angle only works frontally. Always keep your front facing the enemy. Use the terrain to conceal your flanks." Most importantly, Koshkin developed a revolutionary tactic he called pack front, coordinated ambushes using terrain geometry combined with tank geometry. "Position yourselves on the reverse ridges," he orders. "Expose only the top of the turret and the upper frontal plate. The compound angle, 60 degrees of armor plus the terrain angle, makes you mathematically invulnerable." The Germans advance in a wedge formation, confident after months of victories. Major Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, the same man who had laughed at the T-34 4 months earlier, leads the attack. 400 meters, 300, 200. "Agora!" Koshkin orders. 50 T-34s emerge simultaneously from hidden positions. Their 76.2mm guns roar in unison. Within 90 seconds, 36 German tanks are ablaze. The surviving panzers fire frantically. The shells hit the T-34s and ricochet in bright sparks. The 60-degree angle, combined with the steepness of the terrain, creates a compound angle of nearly 75 degrees. It's physically impossible for the German shells to penetrate. Von Thoma shouts into the radio, "Concentrate fire on the lead tank. All guns." 17 shells hit a single T-34, commanded by Lieutenant Lavrinenko. The tank disappears in a cloud of smoke and dust. When the smoke clears, the T-34 continues firing. Impact marks cover its frontal armor like scars, but none penetrate. "Mein Gott," von Thoma whispers, "it's impossible." Lavrinenko inside the T-34 can barely hear due to the constant impacts. Metal fragments ricochet inside the tank. Blood runs from his nose from the concussions, but the geometry holds. He rotates the turret, aligns the gun, and fires. Von Thoma's Panzer III explodes. The Battle of Mtsensk lasts 6 days. Koshkin loses 23 T-34s. The Germans lose 133 tanks. Guderian personally flies to inspect the battlefield. He walks among the wreckage, studying the angles of impact on the destroyed T-34s. Most were hit in the flanks or rear. Almost none were penetrated frontally. He orders a captured T-34 to be sent immediately to Germany. He personally telegraphs Hitler, "We urgently need a new tank." The T-34 has established absolute technical superiority. Its sloped armor design represents a generational leap we did not foresee. Mathematics had won the first round against steel. Stalingrad, December 1942. Feldwebel Otto Carius, future tank ace, with 150 confirmed kills, writes in his diary, "The T-34 has become our nightmare. It's not just its sloped armor, it's what it represents. We can see our target, we can hit it, but we can't destroy it." It's like fighting ghosts made of geometry. At this point in the war, Soviet T-34 production reached terrifying levels, 1,500 per month. Factories in the Urals, operating around the clock, further simplified the design. Quality declined, but the geometry remained. Oberst Hermann Balk, commanding the 11th Panzer Division, reports, "We faced 200 T-34s near the Don River today. Our gunners report an average of 7 direct hits required for every confirmed kill. The math is simple and terrible. They can lose 7 tanks for every one of ours and still win." German panic leads to the rushed development of the Tiger and Panther, both incorporating sloped armor inspired by the T-34. But it is too late. German Tiger production, 1,350 in total during the war. Soviet T-34 production, 57,000. General Friedrich Paulus, surrounded in Stalingrad, sends a desperate message. T-34s are everywhere. They climb over rubble our tanks can't. Their sloped plates ricochet shells at impossible angles, hitting our infantry behind cover. It's as if the laws of physics are conspiring against us. An anonymous German artilleryman left this account. "You line up the shot perfectly. Range, 300 meters. You can't miss. You fire. The shell hits exactly where you aimed. Then you hear that damn sound, clang, and see the shell spinning in the air, deflected by the angle. The T-34 turns its turret toward you. You have maybe 5 seconds to accept that Soviet geometry has won out over German precision." Kursk, July 1943. The largest tank battle in history. 2,000 German tanks, including the new Panthers and Tigers, against 5,000 Soviet tanks, mostly T-34s. Hauptmann Rudolf von Ribbentrop, commanding a Tiger, reports, "I destroyed 5 T-34s today. It cost me 42 tons of ammunition. Every T-34 destroyed is quickly replaced by 3 others. They don't have to be better than us. They just have to be good enough and numerous enough. The 60-degree angle ensures they are good enough." The sound of the Battle of Kursk wasn't just explosions and engines. It was the constant, almost musical sound of shells ricocheting off sloped armor. German veterans described it as der Tanz des Todes, the dance of death, thousands of deflected shells creating a metallic symphony of defeat. Marshal Zhukov, observing the battle, commented, "Every T-34 is a trigonometry problem the Germans must solve under fire. Even when they solve it, there's another problem right behind it." The final figures from Kursk are revealing. The Germans lost 800 tanks, many beyond repair. The Soviets lost 2,500 T-34s, but produced 3,000 in the same month. Berlin, Ministry of Armaments, August 1943. Albert Speer presents Hitler with the final analysis of the T-34. "My Führer, we have captured and studied hundreds of T-34s. Technically, our Tigers and Panthers are superior in armor, firepower, and optics. But the T-34 won the production war. Its simple design with sloped armor allows the Soviets to produce 5 for every one of our Panthers." Hitler, furious, bangs on the table. "Then copy the damn design!" "We tried, mein Führer, but our industry is configured for high-quality vertical shielding. Reconfiguring it now would take 2 years. We don't have 2 years." The genius of the T-34 wasn't just its 60-degree angle, it was what that angle represented, the victory of pragmatism over perfectionism, of mathematics over metallurgy, of mass production over artisanal masterpiece. German chief engineer Ferdinand Porsche, creator of the Tiger, admitted after the war, "We Germans made the mistake of striving for technical perfection. Every Tiger was a work of mechanical art. The Soviets understood something more fundamental. In modern warfare, quantity makes its own quality. The T-34 was good enough, and there were plenty of them. The T-34 represented a radically different design philosophy, brutal simplicity. While German tanks had complex 8-speed transmissions, the T-34 had 4, difficult to shift but impossible to break. While Tigers required specialized maintenance every 100 kilometers, T-34s could go 500 kilometers with basic maintenance. Calculated sacrifice. The T-34's interior was hell. Cramped, noisy, and uncomfortable. A crew's life expectancy was 7 missions. But this was acceptable because there were always more crews, more tanks. Each T-34 was expendable, and paradoxically, this made them invincible as a force. Geometry of metallurgy. The Germans had the best steel in the world. The Soviets had Pythagoras. A 60-degree triangle transformed inferior steel into superior protection. It was mathematical alchemy. Nikita Khrushchev, future Soviet leader, then political commissar, declared, "The T-34 is the material expression of socialism. Many working together are worth more than a few, no matter how superior. Every T-34 destroyed is a martyr. Every T-34 produced is a resurrection." On the German side, frustration turned to grudging respect. General Ewald von Kleist wrote, "The T-34 taught us that war is not about having the best equipment. It's about having good enough equipment in overwhelming numbers. They turned mass mediocrity into strategic excellence." But perhaps the most profound analysis came from a young captured German officer, Hans Rudel. The T-34 is not just a tank. It is an idea made of metal, the idea that intelligence can overcome resources, that geometry can overcome metallurgy, that many united can defeat a superior few. It is the embodiment of total war itself. The production tells the final story. Germany produced 1,347 Tigers, a masterpiece of engineering, a terror on the battlefield, each capable of destroying 10 T-34s. Soviet Union produced 57,000 T-34s, simple, brutal, angled at 60 degrees. The mathematics of war were relentless. For every Tiger that rolled out of German factories, 42 T-34s rolled out of Soviet lines. The 60-degree angle had become not just ballistic protection, but statistical protection. Berlin, May 2nd, 1945. Brandenburg Gate. Major Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, the same man who had laughed at the ridiculous design of the T-34 4 years earlier, now a general and prisoner of war, watches as an endless column of T-34s parades down unter den Linden. Beside him, a Soviet war correspondent asks, "Herr General, you were one of the first to encounter our T-34s. What do you think now?" Von Thoma is silent for a long moment, observing the tanks with their characteristic sloped plates, many bearing the marks of hundreds of impacts that failed to penetrate. "We laughed when we first saw those weird angles," he finally replies. "We said it looked like the work of drunken blacksmiths, that it wasted material, that it complicated production." He pauses, lighting his last German cigarette. "We don't understand that you weren't building tanks. You were building an equation, and equations, Herr Correspondent, can't be destroyed by projectiles." As he speaks, a particularly battered T-34 passes by. Its armor is covered in craters, impact marks, and repair welds, but it still works, still moves forward. "Every mark on that tank," von Thoma continues, "is a German shell that didn't penetrate. Every mark is proof that 60 degrees was more than an angle. It was a philosophy. We built tanks to win battles. You built tanks to win the war." Moscow, Kremlin. Same day, Stalin receives the final report on war production. 57,000 T-34s produced, 44,000 destroyed, 13,000 survivors. Each T-34 cost, on average, the lives of 2.8 Soviet crew members. "Comrade Stalin," asks Molotov, "was it worth it? The cost in lives?" Stalin walks to the window, looking out over Red Square, where T-34s will be displayed on parade in a week's time. Mikhail Koshkin died, proving that his design would work. 160,000 crewmen died, proving he was right. But Berlin is ours. Fascism is dead. Ask the dead if it was worth it. They will answer with their eloquent silence. Nizhny Tagil Tank Factory, Urals, May 9th, 1945. Rosa Shanina, a worker who welded inclined plates onto 3,000 T-34s during the war, her hands permanently deformed from the work. Hears the victory announcement on the radio. She walks down the now silent assembly line, touching the last T-34 produced, number 57,338, which will never see combat. "Every weld," she murmurs, tracing with crooked fingers the seams of the 60-degree inclined plates, "was a theorem. Every tank a proof. We proved that geometry can defeat steel, that mathematics can defeat arrogance." A young apprentice asks, "Comrade Shanina, why 60 degrees? Why not 50 or 70? She smiles, a tired smile of someone who has seen too much. 60 degrees, my boy, is the angle where physics meets economics. More than that and you waste material. Less and you don't protect enough. It's the perfect angle for imperfect survival. It's the angle where David defeats Goliath, not with a sling, but with trigonometry." Berlin, Führerbunker destroyed. May 10, 1945. Soviet engineers examine the ruins of Hitler's bunker. Among the partially burned documents, they find a technical report dated July 1941, just 1 month after the start of Barbarossa. The report, signed by Guderian, has a single line underlined in red by Hitler. The T-34 has frontal armor sloped at 60 degrees from the vertical, making it effectively impenetrable by our standard 50mm guns beyond 100 meters. In the margin, in Hitler's unmistakable handwriting, a note, "Impossible, Soviet propaganda." The Soviet engineer who finds the document, a veteran who served on T-34s, laughs bitterly. They didn't believe it until it was too late. They thought we were too primitive to understand advanced geometry. They didn't realize that necessity is the mother not only of invention, but of applied mathematics. Epilogue. Kubinka Proving Ground, Russia, June 22, 1991. Exactly 50 years after the start of Operation Barbarossa, German and Soviet veterans gather for a reconciliation ceremony. Among them are Otto Karius, the German tank ace, and Dmitry Lavrinenko Jr., son of the legendary T-34 commander. They are standing in front of 2 preserved tanks, a German Tiger and a Soviet T-34. Karius, now an elderly man, walks slowly around the T-34, touching its sloped armor. "You know," he says to Lavrinenko Jr., "I've killed dozens of these, but I've never, not once, penetrated the frontal armor beyond 500 meters. I've always had to flank. I've always had to outsmart the geometry." Lavrinenko Jr. answers, "My father used to say that the T-34 was like Russia itself. Ugly, brutal, simple, but impossible to conquer if you attacked it head-on." Karius laughs, a bitter laugh. "We Germans had a saying during the war. 1 Tiger can destroy 10 T-34s, but there's always an 11th. Now I understand it wasn't about numbers. It was about the angle. 60 degrees wasn't just ballistic protection. It was psychological protection. Every ricocheting shell was a blow to our confidence." A young military historian recording the conversation asks, "Gentlemen, what was the real advantage of the T-34? The angle, the mass production, the simplicity?" The 2 veterans look at each other, then Karius replies, "All of those things, but mostly it was the idea. The idea that you don't have to be perfect to win. You just have to be good enough, in enough numbers, with enough geometry." The T-34 was applied geometry turned into war doctrine. Lavrinenko Jr. adds, "My father wrote in his diary, shortly before he died in combat, the T-34 is not the best tank in the world. It is simply the best tank to win this war." And in the end, that was all that mattered. As the sun sets over Kubinka, the 2 tanks stand side by side. The Tiger, a masterpiece of engineering, complex, powerful, perfect. The T-34, simple, brutal, with its 60-degree canted plates that changed history. Major Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma was right in June 1941 when he said that the T-34's angles looked ridiculous. What he didn't understand was that sometimes the ridiculous is revolutionary. That 60 degrees wasn't an angle, but a philosophy. That those inclined plates weren't just protecting steel and men, but an idea. The idea that applied intelligence can overcome material superiority. They laughed when they first saw the T-34 with its strange lines and rough finish. They stopped laughing when they realized that each ricocheted projectile was the sound of geometry defeating brute force. They stopped laughing when the tracks of the T-34s crossed the Brandenburg Gate. Mikhail Koshkin died in 1940 before seeing a single T-34 in combat, but his geometry lived on in every one of the 57,000 tanks produced. Every 60-degree tilt plate was his theorem. Every ricocheted shell was his proof. In the end, World War II was won not by the best tank, but by the right tank, and the T-34, with its imperfect but perfectly calculated 60 degrees, proved that sometimes mathematics is the deadliest weapon of all. The thunder of their diesel engines has long since died away. The tilted plaques rust in museums and memorials, but the lesson remains etched in steel and geometry. Never underestimate the power of a well-calculated angle. Never laugh at the simplicity that hides genius. Never ignore the mathematics of survival. The angle spoke at 60 degrees, and the world was never the same again.